There is a reason this video has found you at this very moment, not because of coincidence, not because of luck, but because you've just stepped into a threshold that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. They reach this point, they feel the strange vibration you're feeling now, and then they turn around and run back to who they used to be. Back to the safe loop they've been living in for years. But you are still here. And that alone says something inside you is shifting. According to Jung, the moment the old ego begins to crack, the unconscious pushes up chaotic signals. We often mistake that for a crisis, for losing direction. In reality, it is the sound of the shell that has protected you for too long, beginning to split open, as everything that no longer fits you prepares to leave. You are standing in a moment Jung believed may appear only once in a lifetime. A rare instant where you can clearly feel an ending and a beginning coexisting. And before this door closes, I want you to pause for a beat and ask yourself one thing. A simple question, but one that can redirect the entire path ahead of you. Do you have the courage to look directly at what is dying inside you? Or will you return to the familiar place you no longer belong to? If you are still listening to these words, stay. And if you want to continue walking this path together, a like or a subscribe is simply a small signal to let me know you're willing to keep diving deeper into this journey. Because the next part will take you into what most people never dare to face, the truth about themselves. Number 1. Signs of psychological death according to Jung. According to Jung, true transformation always begins with a death. Not the death of the body, but the death of a psychological version of you that no longer fits your path of evolution. The frightening part is that this death does not happen in silence. It appears as strange signals rising from the unconscious, as emotions you can't name, as states of mind that make you feel like you're lost. But if you look closely, you'll see all those signs are pointing to one thing. Your old ego is taking its final breaths. The first sign is often the feeling that you no longer belong in your own life. Everything familiar suddenly feels constricting, like you are putting on a shirt that once fit you, but now chokes your chest. You look at yourself in your relationships, in your work, in your daily habits, and suddenly realize you are playing a role that has expired, a character that no longer matches your soul. Jung calls this the cracking of the persona, the moment the mask you've worn for too long begins to fall. Next comes a kind of inexplicable anxiety. You don't understand what you're afraid of, but your body is constantly taut like a stretched string, as if something is about to explode. The interesting thing is that this anxiety doesn't come from the outside, but from the weight of the shell breaking apart inside. When the unconscious wants change, it never asks your permission. It simply sends signals. You feel as if you're about to do something wrong, but the truth is, you're about to do something right. You're about to move beyond your old version. Another very typical sign is the emptiness you feel toward things that once thrilled you. The goals that used to excite you now echo hollow. You keep doing, but there's no sense of meaning. You keep trying, but there's no drive left. This is not laziness, not burnout. This is the collapse of an old value system. Jung believed that when your soul is preparing to move into a new stage, your old desires will naturally fade away, like ashes falling after the fire has finished its work. Many people will try to pull you back with familiar advice. Just focus on what used to make you happy. But how can you return to something your inner being has already walked away from? How can you love again what existed, only to serve an old version of you? This numbness is the unconscious whispering that a chapter has ended. Another sign is that you begin to see your own darkness more clearly than ever before. You become more sensitive to fear, to anger, to hurt, as if locked shadows from long ago are rising to the surface in waves. Many people panic when this happens. They think they're getting worse, losing themselves. But Jung says the opposite. You can only confront your darkness when you are strong enough to bear the truth of it. When the shadow surfaces, it is not a sign of collapse, but a sign of awakening. You may notice moments that seem unrelated, trouble sleeping, more dreams, especially strange, even frightening dreams. Jung saw dreams as the voice of the unconscious. When you dream of things dissolving, of abandoned places, of unfamiliar roads, or of people you cannot identify, it is not random. It is your unconscious telling you the story of your own life in the symbolic language it always uses. And most of those stories carry the same message. Something in you has reached the time to die. Another important sign is inner conflict. You want to change, yet you're afraid to change. You want to leave, yet you feel reluctant to let go. Jung sees this as the process of separating from the ego, the phase many call an identity fracture. It is like standing on the edge of a new world, while your feet still remember the ground that once held you. This conflict is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of transformation. You may also feel like you no longer resonate with the people around you. Conversations become dull, old connections feel loose. You feel different, harder to fit in. But you are not alone. You are simply detaching from an old level to step into a new level of psychological maturity. The people who once matched your rhythm are not bad. They are just moving at a different pace. And your soul is demanding a wider space. If these signs make you suddenly see yourself in them, try to be honest with yourself and with me. How many of these signs are you carrying right now? All of these signs, no matter how chaotic or frightening, are pointing to one thing. The old ego is collapsing to create space for rebirth. Jung believed this psychological death is not only the first step, but the most important moment on the path of individuation. And the truth is, whether you resist it or not, the process still unfolds. The unconscious always does its work. The only thing you can choose is how you move through it, in panic and resistance, or with listening and understanding. Because on the other side of the fracture, someone is waiting for you. The person you lost a very long time ago, long before this journey began. Number 2, why we are addicted to our old self. You've seen the first signs of psychological death, but to understand why the process is so difficult, why you struggle, wrestle, and even ache when you try to change, you have to face a truth Jung always pointed to. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And this addiction is not rooted in logic. It lives deep in the unconscious, in the psychological structures formed in childhood. In other words, we cling to the very version of ourselves that keeps us stuck, not because it is good, but because it is familiar. Your old self is like a song that has been playing for years. Even if the melody no longer fits, even if the lyrics exhaust you, you know every beat, every pause, every drum hit. And the brain, like a machine addicted to predictability, will always choose the familiar track over the new one, even when the new track could open an entirely different world. Jung once said that humans can endure almost any pain as long as it is familiar. This is the root of addiction. And this addiction is not just a habit, it is a survival mechanism. From a very young age, you learned how to react to survive. If you grew up in an environment where you had to be strong not to get hurt, your unconscious recorded that as a life command. As long as you're strong, you're safe. If you had to be perfect to be loved, your brain recorded perfection equals acceptance. If you had to withdraw to avoid conflict, your body learned that silence equals survival. And these lessons, although created when you were just a child, became the operating system for your entire adult life. The problem is that the program doesn't simply vanish. It runs in the background, repeating itself like an old piece of software you don't even know you're using. This is why Jung insisted, our suffering comes from our unlived life, the unseen, unfelt parts of our psyche. Another expression of this addiction is emotional looping. You can decide to change as many times as you want, but the moment something triggers an old wound, your body immediately snaps back into its familiar reaction. You respond with fear, avoidance, anger, or by shutting down. Not because you want to, but because this is the response your nervous system has rehearsed thousands of times. Someone who was once abandoned will be hypersensitive to signs of being left. Someone who was once judged will be terrified of making mistakes. Someone who was once controlled will react fiercely to any sense of being constrained. These reactions come before logic, before thought. They are reflexes. Or have you noticed yourself repeating the same kind of relationship with different faces? You ask, why do I always choose the wrong person? But the truth is, your unconscious is pulling you toward a familiar pattern of energy. If, as a child, you felt you had to earn love, you'll be drawn to people who make you work for it. If you're used to living in instability, you'll unconsciously seek that same feeling in adulthood. It is not a conscious choice. It is an addiction to what your nervous system has known for too long. This inner contradiction is what makes us addicted to our old self. We want to escape, yet we fear who we might become without it. So we cling. We cling to old stories, old ways of thinking, old reactions, like clinging to a crumbling wall simply because we don't know how to swim in open space. This addiction runs so deep that many people don't even realize they're addicted. They think they are that personality. They believe they were born this way. But in reality, that self is just a recording of old experiences playing over and over. That's why it's so easy to say, this is just who I am, instead of asking, when did I learn to become like this? Jung always emphasized, much of what we call personality is simply a set of reactions we've repeated for so long that we mistake them for our essence. The sad, yet deeply liberating truth is this. True freedom demands that we step into a land we've never walked before, where there is no map, where the self must lead. When you understand that this addiction is not your fault, but the deepest self-protective mechanism of your unconscious, you begin to blame yourself less, fear yourself less. You start to see the separation between who you are today and who you were back then. That moment, according to Jung, is when the process of psychological restructuring truly begins. And the fact that you've listened this far is already clear evidence that some part of you is ready to lay the old ego down. Number 3. Why you can't step into a new life with an old ego. Understanding that addiction is only half the truth. The other half, the part that decides whether you can step into a new chapter of life or not, lies here. You cannot carry your old ego into a new life because that old ego was built to serve a reality that has already ended. It all begins with how the old ego sees the world. It was created from wounds, from limitations, from experiences that shaped the way you understand yourself. If you once lived in doubt, your old ego will see every opportunity through a lens of suspicion. If you once lived in scarcity, your old ego will see everything new as a threat. And when you step into a different phase of life, a phase that requires openness, courage, trust, the old ego still carries the map of the land you've already left. It steers you toward detours, back alleys, and side roads that no longer belong to you. Jung once said, "People don't have ideas. Ideas have people." This line opens up a deep truth. The world your old ego sees is only a reflection of fear, not of possibility. You can be standing in front of the greatest opportunity of your life, and it will still appear distorted through the old filter. It will make you believe, "I'm not enough. I can't do this. I'll fail, just like all the other times." Imagine you are trying to step into a clean, bright, spacious room, your new life. Yet your old ego drags in piles of luggage, insecurity, limiting beliefs, fear of failure, avoidance habits, the old stories you've been telling yourself since you were 15. Wherever you go, that baggage spills out. Every place you enter becomes a mess. And then you conclude, "This definitely isn't my place." But the truth is, you're just unloading your past into the house of your future. This is why so many people receive new opportunities, yet still live the same old life. They get a new job, but their thinking is as fearful as before. They meet a new partner, but their reactions are still shaped by old wounds. They try to pursue new plans, but their body still operates on the old survival patterns. So even as circumstances change, their life remains stuck. And they blame fate, when in reality, the problem is not fate. The problem lies in the filter they use to see everything. The old ego is like an outdated operating system. You try to install new software, but the system can't run it. You try to open new files, but it crashes. You try to upgrade things, but it keeps freezing, simply because the internal platform no longer matches the life you are trying to move toward. A new reality demands a new being, built from new beliefs, new habits, new emotional patterns. The deeper problem is that the old ego doesn't just distort reality. It also distorts what you think your dreams are. You believe you want this thing, but it is actually the desire of the old version of you. You chase goals that are not truly yours, but belong to the person you once had to become. And when you finally achieve them, you feel empty. This explains why many people reach success and still feel lost. It's not that they chose the wrong goals. They chose those goals through an outdated filter. In Jungian psychology, this is called the conflict between the ego and the self. The ego wants to maintain the familiar. The self wants to open into a larger life. The new life is the call of the self. But the old ego doesn't understand that call. It only understands the language of the past. And when these two forces collide, you feel exhausted, torn, and helpless. It's not that you cannot change, it's that the two parts of you are pulling in opposite directions. This is why Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." You may be standing at the boundary between two worlds. One world is inviting you in. The other is pulling you back. And the choice lies with you. Will you let your true self lead the way? Or will you let the old ego drag you back into the familiar loop? Number 4. Recognizing the layers of ego that must die. Right at this point, you need to go one layer deeper. You must clearly recognize which layers of the ego are blocking your way forward. Jung always said that transformation is not a war against oneself, but a journey of peeling away false layers to return to what is most authentic underneath. The first layer is often the version of you that is so strong it does not allow itself to be weak. Followers of this channel often tell me they used to think there were only two ways to survive: be tough or be trampled. So they chose toughness, chose to hold back their tears, chose not to share. That strength helped them live through times when no one stood beside them, but it also made them shut their hearts even when safety was already present. Jung calls this the remnant of the warrior. And the warrior is not wrong. It's just that the warrior is not needed in places meant for love, connection, and peace. If you always have to be strong, that is very likely the first layer of ego that needs to die. The second layer is the version that has to perfect everything. Many people grow up in environments where love always comes with conditions. They are only recognized when they get high grades, when they behave exactly as others expect, when they become the child who never causes trouble. As they grow older, they keep wearing that perfectionist mask. They push themselves to exhaustion. They're terrified of making mistakes, terrified of being judged, terrified of disappointing others. But beneath all that fear is something Jung pointed out. They're not afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being left behind. And because they fear being left behind, they turn their entire life into a stage. But when life is a stage, you never truly feel free. If you realize you always have to try hard just to be loved, that is the next layer of ego that needs to fall away. The third layer appears in those who learn to shrink themselves to feel safe. One follower once shared that as a child, every time they expressed an opinion, they were scolded. Every time they showed emotion, they were called too much. Every time they did something against the family's wishes, they were punished. They learned to be silent. As adults, they find it hard to voice their needs. They're afraid of being a burden. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. Worse yet, they choose relationships where they're belittled because their unconscious mind believes that is their proper place. Jung calls this the ego of the self-shrinking one. And to step into a new life, this layer has to be set down because it is not you. It is just your response to a time when you were too small to protect yourself. Another, more subtle layer is the ego that lives entirely through roles. Many people tie their whole identity to roles like the dutiful child, the good friend, the one who's always there, the caretaker, the capable one, the person who is not allowed to fail. These roles are like uniforms that make you believe you must stay within a certain mold to be accepted. But roles are not identity. Roles are just functions at a given moment. As you grow, you must allow yourself to change roles, or even leave them behind, to discover who you truly are. If you feel you cannot escape the expectations of others, that is a layer of ego holding you back. Another often overlooked layer is the sharp, rebellious version that always opposes everything. This version appears when you were once excessively controlled. When a child is not allowed to decide anything for themselves, they will create a defiant ego just to prove they have a right to choose. As an adult, this ego fights against advice, against help, even against good things. Not because you want to wage war, but because the unconscious remembers the pain of having your power taken away. Yet in adult life, constant opposition is no longer the road to freedom. It is merely an old reflex, protecting an old wound. If you notice that you reject good things just because they make you feel out of control, that is a layer of ego that needs to be released. And then there is the ego that fears being seen. This belongs to those who have long felt they are not enough, not worthy, not special. They live below their true potential, not because they lack capacity, but because they fear that any light shining on them will expose parts they believe are flawed. But as Jung saw it, wherever there is light, there is also shadow. And that shadow is not something shameful. It is what makes you real. When you fear being seen, you don't just hide your weakness, you hide your greatest strength as well. If any layer of ego in this passage suddenly made you recognize yourself, write its name in the comments below. Sometimes simply calling it by name is already the first step toward liberation. Recognizing these layers of ego is not about judgment. It's like opening each drawer in the old house of your soul, looking at each outdated item and deciding what no longer belongs to you. You don't throw them away in hatred. You set them down with gratitude, because they once saved you from things you couldn't face alone. But just like clothes that have become too tight, you cannot keep wearing them without pain. Growing up requires you to grow out of what once protected you. The layers of ego that must die are not worthless parts of you. They are parts that have completed their task and are now meant to become the past. Jung believed that we do not evolve by denying our old parts, but by putting them back in their proper place. When these layers fall away, you do not lose yourself. You only lose what was never truly you. And this is the most important thing. You cannot step into a new life if you don't know which layers you are carrying. Recognition is the first step of liberation. Only when you clearly see the armor you're wearing do you have a real chance to take it off. Number 5. The rituals of transformation. Jung always emphasized that every transformation requires a ritual. Not a mystical ritual in the traditional sense, but a psychological one, a series of intentional actions that allow the conscious and the unconscious to meet. This is the bridge between understanding and transformation, between seeing and becoming. And the first, most fundamental ritual in the process Jung called individuation is non-judgmental observation. Non-judgmental observation means that every time you react according to an old pattern, you don't attack yourself. You simply say quietly, this is the old program running. When you get angry over something small, when you withdraw from intimacy, when you're afraid of something that isn't actually dangerous, you don't see that as a failure. You see it as a window into the unconscious. This very act of observing breaks the loop, because when you can see the pattern, you are no longer fully identified with it. Jung believed that consciousness is the only light that can dissolve darkness, and observation is how you switch that light on. The second ritual is to question your old stories. Whenever you think, "I'm not good enough," "I'm going to be abandoned," "I don't deserve this," don't treat those as truth. See them as echoes from an old version of yourself. You can ask, is this voice really mine? Or does it belong to someone I once had to become just to survive? When you separate yourself from the story, you begin to see that most of your fears do not belong to the present. They belong to a time you no longer live in. This is how you withdraw energy from the old ego, causing it to weaken and fade. The third ritual is to practice a new response, even if it's only slightly different. Jung said, the unconscious changes through experience, not through thinking. This means you must act in a way you have never acted before, even if it seems too small to matter. If you usually stay silent, try saying one sentence. If you usually get defensive, try listening. If you usually withdraw, try opening up a little. If you usually doubt yourself, try saying, "I can." You will be surprised at how a single, small new reaction can open up a completely different psychological space. Each new action is another stitch in the fabric of the self you are becoming. The fourth ritual is to step into discomfort instead of running from it. The old self wants you to run back to the comfort zone every time you are about to move forward. But a comfort zone is no longer safe once it has become a prison. You can say to yourself, "This discomfort is not dangerous. It is simply a sign that the old ego is falling away." This is how you learn to stay with your emotions instead of being controlled by them. This practice expands the capacity of your soul, allowing you to hold more experiences without being crushed by them. In truth, discomfort is a sign that you are on the right path. The fifth ritual is to create space for a new self to appear. No one can be reborn in a constant rush. You need quiet time, your own space, moments in which you can hear your inner voice. This doesn't require hours of meditation. Sometimes it only takes 5 minutes of sitting in silence, writing a few free lines, walking alone, or staring at something without any purpose. In that space, the unconscious sends up messages you cannot hear in the noise of daily life. Jung believed that the soul speaks in whispers, and those who refuse to be still will never hear it. The sixth ritual is to imagine the self you are becoming. Imagination is not delusion. It is how the unconscious learns new patterns. You can picture yourself reacting differently in familiar situations, calm where you once felt fear, strong where you once shrank, open where you once closed off. When you imagine this often enough, the unconscious begins to accept it as a real possibility. And then one day, when you least expect it, you will act exactly as you had imagined without forcing it. This is how you reprogram yourself in the way Jung called a living experiment. The final ritual is to thank the old ego before letting it go. This is the part most people skip. You cannot truly release a part of yourself while you are still fighting it. But if you place your hand on your chest and say, "Thank you for protecting me. I no longer need this old way of protection. I will walk the rest of the way from here," the old ego will stop resisting you. It is not bad. It is simply outdated. And it only needs to be acknowledged before it leaves. Each of these rituals is a step in the journey of individuation. None of them needs to be perfect. None of them requires you to get it right on the first try. Each step only needs to be honest. And as you practice these rituals, you will feel yourself becoming lighter, wider, more flexible. One day, usually when you're not paying attention, you'll realize you have acted differently, chosen differently, become someone different. Not suddenly, but naturally, the way spring arrives without making a sound. Yet the trees have already begun to bloom. Number 6. Rejection from those who knew your past self. You have walked through the rituals that help the old ego fall away. You begin to think differently, react differently, and choose differently. But just when you feel as if you're getting closer to your true self, a new obstacle appears. Strange looks, half-joking comments, stretches of silence from people who once knew you so well. What very few people prepare for is this. Your evolution doesn't just touch your inner life. It collides directly with the whole system of relationships around you. And when one part of a system changes, the entire system trembles. Before you changed, your presence in their lives was a familiar puzzle piece. They knew how you would react, knew what to expect from you, and knew what role you would play in the shared story. Many relationships are not actually based on understanding who you really are, but on being comfortable with a certain version of you. When you no longer behave according to the old orbit, your brains lose its sense of control. And at the unconscious level, humans are deeply afraid of losing control. You begin politely saying no to things that drain you instead of quietly taking them all on. You no longer laugh things off just to avoid conflict. You dare to say, "I'm not okay," instead of always appearing strong. Immediately, those who benefited from the always enduring, always available version of you will feel uneasy. They cannot name that feeling, so it turns into complaints, criticism, or mockery. They say, "You've changed so much lately. You're not like before anymore. You're acting like you're special." But beneath those words lies a deeper message. I no longer know how to handle you. From Jung's perspective, what you're facing is a form of old equilibrium being broken. Every group, every family has an unconscious balance. Someone is the peacemaker, someone carries the responsibility, someone stays quiet, and someone is the scapegoat. When you step out of your old role, the system is forced to rearrange itself. And most people, even those who love you, will try to pull you back into your previous position, not because they are bad, but because they fear the chaos of a new balance. On the other side, inside you, things are not easy either. Any rejection or judgment from people close to you touches very deep layers of your psyche. The fear of abandonment, of being misunderstood, of being seen as the bad one, the traitor. There are nights you lie awake thinking, maybe this change is actually wrong. Maybe I really am being selfish. Maybe I should just go back to how I was so things feel lighter. That is the tug of war between your loyalty to the true self that is growing and your unconscious loyalty to the old system that once gave you a sense of belonging. But Jung once said, "It all depends on how we look at things, and not how they are in themselves." The issue does not lie in the event, but in the way you choose to see it. You can see the departure of some people as proof that you've become worse. Or you can see it as a sign that you are stepping into a new layer of life where only those who truly see you will be able to stay. Sometimes what looks like loss on the surface is actually accuracy at the deepest level. When some doors close, others often open. Jung's concept of synchronicity helps you see this differently. Synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence, the moments when the outer world seems to arrange itself in response to your inner state. You start saying no to being used, and you happen to meet someone who respects your boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself in relationships, and then a new connection appears in which you are heard and respected. You dare to pursue what you've always longed for, and an unexpected opportunity appears right when you need it most. If in the past you tended to see these things as mere luck, synchronicity offers another view. It is the alignment between inner and outer. When you change direction inside, life rearranges what shows up outside. The people who enter at this stage are not randomly kind. They carry a frequency that matches who you are becoming. They might show up in a class, in a small group, in an online conversation, in a cafe, or even in a video you happen to click on. But what makes them different from before is this: you don't have to shrink or exaggerate yourself to be with them. This doesn't mean everything will suddenly become perfect. Even the right relationships will have their own challenges. But the difference is this: in these connections, you no longer have to betray yourself just to stay. You can bring both your light and your shadow into the space without fear of being erased. And that is one of the clearest signs that you are truly moving away from the old ego and stepping closer to your true self. So, when you face rejection from people who knew your past self, remember, they only knew a temporary version of you, one that was born to fit the context of that time. Your growth does not mean you are betraying them. It simply means you are no longer willing to betray yourself to keep something that has expired. Those who truly belong to your new journey will understand this. And the universe, in its quiet but precise way, will send them to you at the very moment you are brave enough not to return to who you used to be. If you've come this far, it means that somewhere beneath all the layers of doubt, you has heard a very small but persistent call. The call to come back to yourself. No one else can answer that call for you. Only you know how tired you are of repeating the same old stories. And only you can feel the full weight of living out of alignment with who you really are. Jung never promised that this journey would be gentle, but he always believed that the price of standing still is far higher than the price of moving forward. You can keep living as if you never heard any of this, dismissing the tremors inside as just a phase. Or you can treat this moment as a turning point. The day you stop seeing your inner chaos as an enemy and start seeing it as an invitation to step out of an old version that has reached its limit, so that a truer, larger, quieter self can begin to move forward. Somewhere in your future, another version of you is waiting for the day you dare to take this first step.